What if your only moral duty was, well, just to yourself? Like no generosity, no self-sacrifice for others, just pure, unadulterated self-interest.
Sounds pretty wild, doesn't it?
It sounds totally wild, almost counterintuitive to how we normally think about being good.
Right.
Yet some really influential thinkers argue it's not just a way, but maybe the only coherent way to think about our moral lives.
Yeah, it's a challenging perspective.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into some truly fascinating and maybe, framely, quite challenging ideas about the very foundation of morality. Our sources take us deep into philosophical skepticism, which, for today, basically means, questioning fundamental beliefs we often just accept, especially about morality.
Yeah, taking a hard look at what we take for granted.
And we're focusing on a view that turns our everyday understanding of right and wrong completely on its head.
Indeed. And the mission here isn't just to describe these skeptical views, but to really dig into why they might be so attractive to some people.
And crucially,
Where their arguments might, well, fall short. We're looking at what happens when we question whether we have any basic obligations to others at all, beyond what helps us personally.
our deep dive today zeroes in on one of the most compelling versions of this doubt, something called ethical egoism.
Ah, yes, ethical egoism.
That's the view that says your only moral duty is to you. Imagine a world where maximizing your own self-interest isn't just okay, but it's the supreme moral principle, the absolute measure of right and wrong.
Wow.
We'll explore what that actually means, break down the key arguments used to support it, and see how they hold up.
Sounds good.
So ethical egoism is not just about being selfish sometimes, which, let's be honest, most of us are.
That's just human nature to some extent.
Right. This is different. It's the belief that our only moral duty, our only ethical obligation is to ourselves.
The only one.
The only one. You're allowed to help others, be kind, whatever, but only if it ultimately benefits you in the long run.
So the motive is key.
Exactly. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. If it doesn't serve your self-interest, you have zero moral duty to do it.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is how dramatically this view clashes with what most of us instinctively believe about morality. I mean, think about it. Our common sense everyday morality usually pushes us towards generosity, compassion, benevolence.
Right, looking out for others.
It tells us to avoid being purely selfish, to try and be impartial, to recognize that other people matter, and sometimes even to sacrifice our own immediate interest for people in greater need or maybe for the greater good.
Yeah.
Ethical egoism, like you just said, rejects all of these common assumptions. It's a really radical departure from conventional moral thought.
It's a complete flip.
Yeah.
It suggests our gut feelings about, being good or doing the right thing might actually be totally misguided.
Or maybe just a complicated way back to our own benefit.
Exactly. Or at best, simply a more roundabout route to our own advantage. It really makes you question the whole idea as altruism.
It certainly does.
Okay, so this is a powerful, provocative idea. But how do people actually argue for it? Let's dig into some of the most influential arguments.
Okay.
We can start with one famously championed by the author Ayn Rand. It's often called the self-reliance argument.
Right. This argument suggests a very specific, almost counterintuitive path to making everyone better off.
How does that work? By focusing on yourself.
Kind of paradoxically, yes. It frames a world where everyone focusing only on themselves somehow leads to the best outcome for everybody. The argument, laid out logically, goes something like this.
Okay.
Premise 1. The most effective way of making everyone better off is for each person to just mind their own business and tend only to their own needs. Premise 2. We ought to take the most effective path to making everyone better off.
Makes sense so far.
Therefore, the conclusion is, we each ought to mind our own business and tend only to our own needs.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. On the surface, that sounds almost appealing, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah. The tidiness of it.
Yeah, the idea that if everyone just responsibly handles their own stuff, takes care of themselves, we'd all, collectively prosper.
Less mess, maybe.
Right. It hints at a world free from unnecessary meddling, where individual initiative is king. But our sources point out two big, maybe even crippling problems with this logic.
Precisely. Let's start with that first premise. Yeah. The idea that everyone is better off if we all just mind our own business.
Okay.
Our sources argue this is, well, simply false.
How so?
Consider a critical situation.
Yeah.
If you're, say, having a heart attack or you've fallen into a river and can't swim,
Oh, God.
and I happen to be right there, maybe I know CPR or I'm a strong swimmer, if I decide to just leave you alone because, hey, it's not my business.
Then I'm definitely not better off.
Exactly. You are definitely demonstrably worse off. You might even die. That's a pretty clear failure of the premise.
That heart attack example really hits home. It shows how pure self-reliance just breaks down completely in emergencies. But what about, like, less dramatic everyday stuff? Is there any context where just minding your own business really is the best way for everyone? Or is that premise just flawed from the start, even in theory?
I think it's fundamentally flawed, even in theory, because complete self-reliance isn't even a good general policy.
Right.
Now, it might be better than everyone constantly meddling in each other's lives for no reason.
Sure, that would be chaos.
But there's a clear middle path that's way better. One that allows for self-interest, absolutely, but also recognizes and sometimes even demands a bit of self-sacrifice when we can offer great help at little cost to ourselves.
Like what?
Oh, simple things. Donating blood, maybe helping out with a community project, even just giving directions to someone who's lost.
Small things, big collective impact.
Exactly. These are small individual costs, usually, but they collectively make everyone significantly better off through mutual aid. The idea that total self-reliance makes everyone better off, it just doesn't hold up in the real world, or even if you think about it hypothetically.
So the very first pillar of this argument kind of crumbles under scrutiny.
Okay.
But you said there was a second problem.
Yes. Furthermore, the second premise of the argument, the one that says we ought to take the most effective path to making everyone better off, that's something an ethical egoist actually cannot consistently accept.
Wait, why not? It sounds like a reasonable goal.
It might sound reasonable to us, but for a true ethical egoist, the ultimate moral duty is to maximize personal benefit. Your own. There's no built-in moral requirement to make everyone better off. An egoist allows helping others or caring about the general good only when and because it maximizes their own self-interest, not otherwise.
So the argument for egoism uses a principle, caring about everyone's well-being, that egoism itself completely rejects.
Exactly.
That's more than just a logical knot. It's like trying to build a house by tearing down its own foundation while you're building it.
That's a great analogy.
What does this tell us? Not just about this specific argument, but about the challenge of trying to make a purely self-interested morality seem okay or justifiable to everyone. Does it suggest egoism is maybe inherently a philosophy you can only really justify to yourself, making a universal defense almost impossible?
That's a really profound observation, and I think it absolutely suggests that. The moment you bring in a principle like making everyone better off is a moral reason to do something,
You've already conceded ground.
you've already stepped outside the purely self-interested framework of ethical egoism. You're acknowledging some kind of duty or value beyond just yourself.
Right.
This argument essentially commits a logical fallacy. It tries to prove ethical egoism using a premise that isn't egoistic at all.
Gotcha.
It really reveals the difficulty, maybe the impossibility, of constructing a universally appealing argument for a philosophy that is, by its nature, focused solely on the individual's benefit. It's trying to have its cake and eat it too, arguing for self-interest by appealing to a principle of collective good.
Fascinating. So we've just kind of dismantled the idea that total self-reliance automatically leads to universal good. But what if the argument for ethical egoism comes from a different angle? Not from what helps everyone, but from, say, a radical focus on individual rights and really limited obligations.
Okay.
Let's turn to an argument that draws pretty heavily from libertarian thinking.
Right. This argument, which sometimes gets brought up to support ethical egoism, claims that our moral duties to help other people have only two legitimate sources: consent and reparation.
Consent and reparation. What does that mean practically?
Practically, it means any duty you have to help another person comes either from voluntarily agreeing to it, your consent, whether spoken or implied.
Like making a promise.
Exactly, like making a promise. Or it comes from having violated someone's rights and therefore owing them something to repair the wrong you caused. Reparation.
Okay.
If you haven't consented to help someone and you haven't wronged them, then according to this view, you simply have no duty to help them, period.
This argument definitely sounds like it could resonate with people who really value individual freedom, autonomy, minimal interference.
Sure. It emphasizes negative rights, the right to be left alone.
It frames our moral world as built on voluntary agreements and personal responsibility, not these broad, fuzzy obligations to everyone. But does it actually support ethical egoism?
That's the key question, and our sources are very clear here. Even if this libertarian argument were sound on its own terms, and that's a separate debate, it cannot consistently support ethical egoism.
Why not? They sound kind of similar in limiting duties.
The fundamental reason is that ethical egoists cannot, by definition, accept the argument's central claim about where moral duties come from.
Okay.
Egoists deny that consent or reparation are the ultimate sources of moral duty. For them, remember, self-interest is the only ultimate source.
What does that actually mean in practice, then? It feels like a subtle difference.
It is subtle, but it's absolutely crucial. It means an ethical egoist would only fulfill a voluntary agreement or fix damage they caused if and only if doing that is ultimately in their best interest. If keeping a promise, say, you promise to volunteer at a hospital or you sign a contract to sell your house, if fulfilling that promise doesn't actually make the egoist better off,
then they wouldn't do it.
Egoism says they have no duty to stick to it. In fact, egoism would technically forbid them from upholding their end of the deal if it's genuinely detrimental to their overall self-interest.
Wow.
The act of consenting or the act of causing harm doesn't inherently create a moral duty for the egoist. Only their personal benefit does.
Right. So an egoist would only keep a promise if it serves them, which could potentially undermine all trust, couldn't it? But hang on. Wouldn't even a smart egoist realize that building a reputation for keeping promises, for being reliable, is usually in their long-term self-interest?
That's a critical point to consider, absolutely. A sophisticated egoist certainly might keep promises most of the time.
Right, for strategic reasons.
Exactly, because cultivating a reputation for reliability often does serve their long-term self-interest. They might calculate that the benefits of being trusted outweigh the immediate cost of fulfilling one specific promise.
Right.
However, and this is the key difference, if a specific situation comes up where breaking a promise offers a much greater personal gain, and maybe they think they can get away with it without wrecking their reputation,
then egoism says go for it.
Then ethical egoism wouldn't just permit breaking the promise, it would require it, because their duty is to maximize self-interest.
Whereas libertarianism wouldn't.
Right. The libertarian argument, based on consent, would likely require you to keep your word simply because you consented, regardless of whether it's good for you right now.
Okay, I see the split.
So, since egoism and this specific libertarian argument can give totally conflicting advice in certain situations, egoism simply cannot get genuine support from libertarianism. Their fundamental reasons for acting are just different.
Got it. So an argument that looks like it limits duties to others doesn't actually line up with ethical egoism because the ultimate reason for acting, or not acting, is different. Self-interest versus contreporation.
Precisely. It's a great example of how two ideas can seem aligned on the surface but unravel when you look at their core principles.
Okay. Finally, there's a third idea that sometimes gets tangled up with ethical egoism or maybe mistakenly used to prop it up. Psychological egoism.
Ah, yes.
This one really gets into like what makes us tick as humans.
Right. Psychological egoism isn't a theory about how we should act. It's a theory about how we do act. It's descriptive.
What does it describe?
It's the view that our sole motivation, the only thing driving us in everything we do, every choice, every action, is the pursuit of our own self-interest.
The sole motivation.
Oh.
For everything.
According to this theory, yes. If psychological egoism is true, then genuine altruism, the direct desire to help others just for their own sake, purely out of concern for them with no ulterior motive.
Like truly selfless acts.
That kind of pure altruism simply does not exist. It's an illusion.
So even when someone donates anonymously to charity or rushes into a burning building,
psychological egoism would say that deep down it's still driven by some form of self-benefit. Maybe avoiding guilt, maybe feeling good about oneself, getting that warm glow, seeking social praise later, or even just the evolutionary drive to protect kin, which ultimately benefits the self's genes. It all boils down to self-interest somehow.
That's a pretty profound statement.
Yeah.
That every seemingly selfless act is secretly just about us. It really makes you wonder about the true nature of human motivation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
But hang on, if that's true, if maybe we are just wired this way.
Yeah.
If our sources say, look, this is just how humans are, does that mean ethical egoism is just describing reality, and therefore it's how we should be? Does is imply ought here?
That's exactly the confusion many people fall into. And it's where a really fundamental philosophical distinction comes into play. It's often called the is-ought problem, famously highlighted by David Hume.
The is-ought problem. Okay.
Psychological egoism, remember, is a descriptive theory. It claims to tell us how things are specifically, about our motivations.
It describes what is.
Right. Ethical egoism, on the other hand, is prescriptive or normative. It tells us how things ought to be, how we should act morally.
It prescribes what ought to be.
Exactly. And the crucial point is, just because we are supposedly always motivated by self-interest doesn't automatically mean we ought to pursue it as our sole moral duty. You can't just leap from a description of fact to a moral rule.
Ah, okay. So a fact about human nature doesn't automatically become a moral command. Can you give us another quick example just to make that distinction super clear?
Sure, think about it this way. Let's say, hypothetically, scientists discovered humans had some innate biological predisposition towards, I don't know, aggression or conflict.
Oh,
Finding that that fact about our biology wouldn't automatically make aggression morally right. It wouldn't mean we ought to be aggressive or that we should encourage it.
right. We'd probably try to manage or overcome it.
Precisely. Similarly, even if someone argues convincingly that we're wired for self-interest, which is itself debatable, that fact alone doesn't automatically justify making self-interest our supreme moral guide. The leap from was or how we are motivated to ought, how we should morally act, is a huge philosophical jump. It needs its own separate justification.
Got it.
And psychological egoism, being just a description, simply doesn't provide that moral justification for ethical egoism. It's a common mistake to think it does. One describes behavior, the other prescribes morality.
That's a really crucial distinction. It helps clear up why just observing how people behave or think they behave doesn't automatically validate that behavior as a moral principle. So psychological egoism doesn't give ethical egoism the moral legs it needs to stand on.
Not on its own, no.
Okay. We've really pulled apart these arguments for ethical egoism. Looked at the self-reliance claim, the libertarian angle, the psychological confusion.
Right.
We've seen where they stand and maybe where they stumble. But stepping back from the sort of academic exercise,
Yeah.
why does this deep dive matter to you, listening right now? What's the practical takeaway for how we live our lives or think about our responsibilities?
That's a great question. If we connect this to the bigger picture, I think understanding these skeptical arguments about morality, even if we ultimately find them unconvincing, is incredibly valuable.
How so?
Well, it forces us to critically examine our own ethical assumptions. It pushes us to ask, okay, why do I actually believe I have obligations to other people? What really grounds those beliefs beyond just, habit or what society tells me?
It makes you justify your own stance.
Exactly. It sharpens our critical thinking skills when we're faced with claims maybe from politicians or public figures or wherever that challenge really fundamental aspects of how we think society should work or how humans should treat each other.
So it's about having the tools to actually evaluate these big ideas, rather than just accepting them blindly or maybe just dismissing them without really thinking it through. Like when you encounter someone, maybe even a friend, who's advocating a purely self-interested approach to life, or maybe even public policy. Understanding ethical egoism and its weaknesses gives you a framework. You can analyze their claims beyond just a gut reaction. You can ask, are they making one of these flawed arguments we talked about? Are they maybe confusing is with ought?
Exactly. It also highlights just how complex human motivation really is.
Yeah.
By exploring the arguments for and against ethical egoism, we get better equipped to understand the different things driving our own actions and the actions of others, which hopefully can lead to maybe a bit more empathy or at least more nuanced moral judgments.
Right. It compels us to really consider the justifications for our most deeply held moral beliefs.
Definitely.
So we've journeyed through this pretty challenging landscape of ethical egoism today. We explored its core definition.
Self-interest is the only duty.
Right. And we dissected the main arguments used to defend it from that self-reliance idea supposedly leading to universal good,
Which didn't quite hold up.
to the idea that duties only come from consent and reparation.
Which didn't quite align with egoism's core.
And we even touched on that descriptive claim of psychological egoism and the is-ought gap.
We've seen how what might look like logical support for a purely self-interest-based morality often seems to contain internal contradictions or maybe rests on shaky or false premises.
Yeah.
It really encourages us, I think, to think more deeply about what truly motivates our actions and what our moral duties genuinely are, making that key distinction between what we do and what we ought to do.
And that brings us, as always, to our final provocative thought for you to ponder on your own.
Okay.
If genuine altruism, that is, the desire to help others purely for their sake, with no hidden self-serving motive if that truly exists, even occasionally, what does that imply about the inherent nature of human connection and about our responsibilities to one another, even when helping demands a real personal cost?
Ugh, that's a big one. It leaves us with that enduring question, doesn't it? Is morality fundamentally a deeply personal journey of just maximizing our own well-being?
Right.
Or is it something fundamentally intertwined with our shared humanity, our collective well-being, demanding a perspective much broader than just our own individual interests?
Something to definitely chew on long after this deep dive ends.